there may be other things that crop up during the session, Wendy, that you'll be able to comment on or want to comment on later. So thank you for that. I'm going to move on to Moira. Moira, do you want to introduce yourself and say what you want to say, bearing in mind your experience, because I know you've done quite a bit of thinking about what home means and what's important to you. So really interested to know.
So there are 4 points that I'd like to start with. And one of them is, you know, the question is why home matters to me. But the first point is it matters to me because it matters to Dave, my husband, as well, because we have discussed all of this. The second one is home's not the same as house. I mean, we all know that, don't we? But house contributes to what we see as home. So you can't really take one away from the other. Thirdly, I realised the importance of home when I was caring for my mother. Now, my mother didn't have dementia. She was physically frail, but we brought her to live with us for the last 2.5 years of her life, and I nursed her here. And I realised what home meant to her, and it made me think about what home meant to us. And the fourth thing is that we are fortunate enough to have some funds to use for adaptations ourselves. And I know not everybody has that. And but sometimes having the funds isn't always the best thing, because it then poses other problems, which I'll come on to. So for us, home is about feeling totally comfortable. And Dave doesn't feel comfortable in our home if we have visitors who he doesn't feel comfortable with. So we don't have them. It's as simple as that. We try to avoid those, you know, and just random people coming round. And I never invite anyone to the house without checking with him that he's happy about it. And basically, we realized it's a place where you can be yourself. That's the important thing. And you can do things as you want to do them. But another thing that's important to us as well is space. And I don't mean we've got a huge house. I don't mean that. But we don't live in one little room either, which is another issue for us. My friend's mum, in her latter years of her life, had dementia, and she actually was cared for in a home. And one of the things that quite upset me, that I felt that in some ways people can become slaves to routine and policy. Because when my mum lived with us, my mum, it sounds, you know, some people would say I was doing the wrong thing. She didn't always want to get up first thing in the morning, and she was physically very frail anyway. So, you know, she couldn't get herself out of bed anyway. But she says, I don't feel like getting up yet. And so I'd say, okay. So, you know, she'd have her wash and then she might have another snooze and things like that. But it could be as late as 5 o'clock in the day. And she'd say, I like to get up now. So I'd say, okay, come on, then get up. And she'd come downstairs on the stair lift and so on. And it upset me that my friend's mum, if she didn't feel like getting dressed that day, had to stay in her room. Now, I can understand why, because it was about dignity, it was a mixed home, and so I can see why it was happening. But I felt as if my mum could do whatever she wanted, as if she lived on her own, really. She could, you know, it was something that was her choice that, she, you know, we could facilitate, rightly or wrongly. And so it is something that I feel that, you know, we want to live our lives as we want to and do things when we want to. When we go on holiday, we tend to prefer to stay in hotels or even self-catering accommodation and do our own thing. We don't like to have the routine of we've got to get up and go out at a certain time and things like that. So even we take our home with us in a sense and how we like our home to be. When Dave was diagnosed with dementia, we realised we may need to make some changes to our home as his dementia progressed. And a friend of ours who we've met since Dave was diagnosed actually did a talk once on should we stay or should we go? And we decided on the former, that we would like to stay in this house, although house isn't of huge importance to us, although we do like this house. It was mainly because there isn't really a lot of housing around, usually bungalows or flats, that would meet what we see as the home we want to live in. And so that was something that, concerned us. So we thought, well, how can we make this house suitable for Dave's future needs and possibly even mine? I've got to acknowledge, I don't know what the future holds for me. As I mentioned to a few people at the beginning, I've recently broken my arm and I've never felt so disabled in my whole life. So we just don't know what's around the corner. But the other thing you're advised, as well as considering should you stay in the home or move somewhere else, is do it sooner rather than later, because it's important that Dave is able to adapt to any changes that we do make while he's still capable of adapting. So what did we want or need? What we found was it was really difficult to get advice. And the people, I won't say all the people, but some of the people who claim to offer advice want you to do what they say. And they often want to turn your home into a mini hospital. And that's what it was like in my mum's case, But my mum was, when she came to live with us, she was 93. And she died before she was 96. And she was quite content with what she had on offer. But she did have all the house if she wanted it, but she had her own room. And so that was fine. She coped with the fact that she had a hospital bed and things like that. Fortunately, we had a second shower because getting my mum into the bath became very, very difficult. And we went through all the processes to try and get that sorted out. But we changed that we changed an ensuite into a wet room. And the professionals wouldn't do it for us because they said it didn't meet the requirements. But when we had it done, they said, even though it doesn't meet regulations, we feel it's functional and safe. And I didn't care whether they felt it was, because I would try to keep her safe anyway. I wasn't really bothered. We managed very, very well. All I needed was a little chair to wheel her in on. So we had that after my mum died. And so as Dave's dementia has progressed, we found that invaluable. But of course, that's upstairs. So we had to think about what about at the time when he may not be able to go upstairs. And so what we've now done is we've had an adaptation made where we've got a downstairs shower as well. Because I know I had a stair lift for my mum. I know I couldn't get Dave on a stair lift. Although my mum wasn't terribly light, I could manage to do that. So I know that if things progress, Dave would have to be downstairs. That's the thing. And we've got space where we could put a bed and things like that. And now we've got the shower and so on. I even tried to get advice from a company that claims to specialize in accessible bathrooms and so on. And I explained exactly what my thoughts were, and they didn't bother getting back to me. And it was a bathroom company who sorted it out. And this was a chap who fits bathrooms and kitchens and things like that. And he came up with some great suggestions I felt were great. And I've got to admit, it's probably more about my preferences than Dave's, because, Dave isn't really into, the aesthetically pleasing home. He, as long as he got somewhere to sit and a comfortable bed to sleep in, he's quite happy. But what concerns me is that why can't accessible also be aesthetically pleasing? We watch these DIY SOS programs, and the things that they do, they try so hard to hide the things that do make things look more like a hospital environment. And you just don't, I mean, some of them cost mega bucks, of course, but nevertheless, they should be able to reach some balance somewhere, particularly earlier on in the journey through dementia. And there are so few places that offer places for sale. I was recently looking at something, because I still do look around, even though I've no intentions of moving. But there's one company which builds flats and bungalows, and the size of the wet rooms in them is massive, because the idea is they want people to be able to stay in their own home. And they said very few of the people who purchase these actually end up in homes, that they manage to stay with additional care provided. So I think that was, to actually have that mindset when you start out. But even just the building of bungalows is something that really bugs me. I think it should be mandatory for all developers to build so many bungalows on every new estate that they build. Dave had a bad infection in August, which caused some confusion, and he had some sort of fall or collapse or faint in the shower. So we've now been given a grab rail. And I've got to be honest, this is a failure on my part. What I didn't think, they fitted the grab rail, we looked at the grab rail, we tested the grab rail, everything was fine. And it was only when I was talking to Dave, assessing the suitability of the grab rail, what do you think of it? And it was only then that he says, where is it? It was a white grab rail on white tiles. And it was my fault, because I could show it to him and he saw it was there. But so anyway, I got in touch with them again, and we were finally able to get a dark blue grab rail, which stands out perfectly and benefits both of us really. But we didn't really know how useful it was going to be until we got it. That was one of the things. And it's interesting that when I broke my elbow and I had to go in to have an operation, the physiotherapist said to me the next morning, is there anything that you need urgently? And it was my brother had pointed out, he said, you could do with a second rail on your stairs because we only have one. And thankfully, by the Monday I had that was a Saturday, Monday I had a phone call, Wednesday it was fitted, so now I can go down the stairs safely. So that will benefit both of us as well. But it makes me think that our local authority is just very good at fitting rails, because all we've had is two rails, a grab rail and another rail. So, that's another thing that is helping with my temporary incapacity. But at least the council responded quickly. But as I mentioned, even though my mother didn't have dementia, the experiences of caring for her had an effect on my view now. And she always said that, as she got older, that she would like to live in a supported flat, because her widowed friend lived in one and she thought it was lovely. And my father passed away fairly suddenly, although he was 92. And my mum, we knew, couldn't live independently when my dad died. And she would need something more than this where her friend lived. That was the thing. And although she loved company, she also liked to do what she wanted, as I've already mentioned. And she wasn't antisocial, but she was quite happy being with Dave and I, and, occasionally seeing other people. And it didn't seem to bother her that she gave up basically access to her own home, because I like to think she had access to our own home. But when I'm talking to providers of sheltered accommodation and the like, the only thought that goes through my mind is, how would I collapse our home down into what you get in sheltered accommodation, and certainly even less if you move into a home. And we've discussed on numerous occasions about this, and the thought of it, because there are things that Dave finds in the house in obscure places. He'll find a book, even though he can't read, that's really special to him in some way. And he'll say, well, I've just been, and I've just seen this on the shelf. And to have all the space that we've got to put all these things and all my clothes is, is very valuable to us. And we are horrified at the thought of moving into one of these tiny spaces. And Dave is probably even more horrified, because he's a person who, while he's very, very sociable and he'll talk to anybody, he loves his own company as well. And he values what our home provides. And so we think that there should be so much more done to try and help people to change their home, if that's what they want to do, into something which is functional, looks good, and they feel comfortable and happy in. And I just was reading the Merseycare magazine last week, and it was to do with a man who has Parkinson's, but the article was entitled, "I don't want my husband to die among strangers." And that is my goal for Dave. Although he says himself, well, if I got to the stage where I didn't know you and I didn't know anybody, you know, you could put me in a home, because I wouldn't know, would I? But I would like to think that I'm going to keep him with me so I can look after him in our home.
Wow, thank you, Moira. That's a very powerful ending to what you had to say to us. A few things leapt out at me there. One is the issue about things being functional, but also aesthetically pleasing. They don't have to be clunky and crass. They can be attractive as well. The second thing is, a few people have commented on this, but it's a really important issue that you are entitled to get a professional assessment of your needs, regardless of how you're going to, you know, whether you're going to be eligible for financial help or not. We've heard a few stories, because Tide's been running a project called Law for Dementia Carers, which has looked at these very specific issues around how the law, human rights affects people. And we've had lots of instances where people have asked for an assessment and been told because they've got financial resources of their own, they won't get one. And similarly, people who've been seeking OT assessments, even though they know they might have to pay for things themselves, have been similarly knocked back. So it's a really important issue, and it's important that carers understand they have got that right to ask for that, and that they can be as assertive as possible in seeking those assessments. From my own experience, my mum was very arthritic. She lived on her own, and she wanted a profile bed so she could get in and out easily, and she could sit up in bed easily. And she responded to one of these advertisements in the paper. Salesman turns up with a box of chocolates and a plant, and before she knew it, she signed up to buy a £3,500 bed, which she'd never seen. Fortunately, I intervened. My mum was quite cross with me, actually, because she wanted to do it herself, and I felt bad because I'd had to do that, but I cancelled the contract, and I managed to get her to visit our OT resource centre in Liverpool, where she was assessed by an OT who gave her, you know, details of what would meet her needs, and she got perfect solution to that for £900. People spend a lot of money on adaptations and aids to daily living that turn out to be useless because they haven't had that professional advice. So it's really important that people can speak up and assert that. Wendy, you want to say something?
Yeah, because I live on my own, I had a real big struggle to get an assessment, because I asked my local council for an assessment and was told, because I have dementia, and was told, well, you live on your own, so you must be okay. You don't need an assessment. So, you know, it's sometimes the understanding of the people you speak to as well. Yeah,
thank you for that.